All right. Hello and welcome to Three Big Things, a Cineboys, but not the Cineboys podcast, part of the Cork Bats podcast network. I'm Kenny from Cork Bats, head boy of the Cineboys, and Three Big Things is a podcast where I sit down with a guest for an in-depth discussion on specific movies and sometimes TV shows. Why is it called Three Big Things? Simple. We're going to give you three big things, sometimes more, that we think make this movie or TV show special, or maybe not so special, which we'll talk about. And then just a quick warning up front, this is no longer a spoiler-free podcast. We tried to make it spoiler-free in the beginning, the first few episodes, and we've decided to abandon that. So just so you know, spoilers ahead, unless we don't talk about the spoilers, they may not even come up, but we're not going to stop ourselves from talking about spoilers if it arises. So if you are waiting to see this movie before you get any spoilers, maybe go ahead and stop listening and maybe go see it and listen later. So this week we're discussing The Exorcist Believer, and I will be joined by Billy Rock of Do You Like Apples? Billy, how are you?
I'm doing great, Kenny. I'm excited to be here. My first podcast recording of the night. I'm not quite sure when you're releasing this, but
Busy
we're going
man.
back to back today, and we're going first. So I'm energized, and
Good.
my podcast is going to suffer as a result. But I'm
Okay,
glad I can help
well,
out.
I see you have a nice glass of energy drink,
Mm-hmm.
adult energy drink. So I think
Yes, it is.
that's really going to help for this discussion. I feel like I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what you guys are talking about. Probably something more sophisticated, I would assume.
Definitely
Um,
not.
but maybe I'll okay, good. But maybe I'll get you just like kind of loosened up, and it'll flow well into your next engagement.
Mhm.
So yeah, again, we're talking The Exorcist Believer, which is I'm not 100% sure. I think it's the third or fourth sequel in the I don't know. I kind of lost track because
There's
there is a original trilogy of Exorcist films,
right.
which I've seen one and three. I've never seen
Mhm.
two. One I think is the scariest movie ever made.
Ooh.
To me it stands up as like I can't think of another movie. There's a few movies that have come out since that I think are maybe in that discussion, but I do
Mhm.
feel like the original Exorcist might be the scariest movie I've ever seen. Exorcist 2 I never saw. Exorcist 3 I thought was kind of weird. Maybe jump a couple times.
Mhm.
Nothing really that
It's got a
special.
great jump scare in
Oh
that
yeah,
one.
it has like I think I watched a video of like maybe the top one or two biggest jump scares in any movie. The
Right.
Exorcist 3 has. And
Mhm.
if you haven't seen it, if you like scary movies, maybe check it out. Probably not going to leave a lasting impression, but you'll know what we're talking about when you get
Yeah.
that jump scare.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, and I think there's been a few maybe like prequels or side sequels after Exorcist 3 came
Right.
out. But this is like the first this is the Exorcist Legacy sequel. We live in the time nowadays. This time in American history is known as the Legacy sequel area, where basically we're getting all these movies, all these legacy sequels from franchises that are 30, 40, 50 years old. Um, and this is the latest one. So, The Exorcist Believer is a new movie directed by David Gordon Green, who you might know. He directed the Halloween reboots that came out, the Halloween trilogy, recent one. It is written by David Gordon Green and Peter Sattler, and the story is by Scott Teems, David Gordon Green, and Danny McBride, believe it or not, who I
Mhm.
believe was also behind the story for the Halloween reboot trilogy. I think him and David Gordon Green have a pretty close working relationship. And then this movie stars Leslie Odom Jr., Lydia Jewett, Olivia O'Neill, Jennifer Nettles of Sugarland. I don't know if you caught that, Billy.
I did not.
Um, yeah. Anyways, Norbert Leo Butz, Ann Dowd, and Ellen Burstyn. So yeah, I mean, like I said, essentially the way that this works is we go through three big things. Billy, as the guest, I'm going to give you two of the three big things to talk about. And we'll just kind of go through one by one. And as we go through this, you'll kind of get an idea of how we felt about the film. Once we get through the three big things, we'll then make a recommendation whether or not you should see this movie or not. But let's go ahead. Let's get into it. Billy, what is your first big thing on The Exorcist Believer?
If you don't like scares, this is the horror movie for you.
Yeah.
Man, this movie was boring.
Yeah.
My goodness, I did not expect to leave that impression. I can handle a bad horror movie.
Yeah.
Um, and as long as it has at least one or two scares in there, I'm pretty good to go. But I saw it by myself. The scariest part was someone behind me seemingly walking around for part of the movie,
Unsettling.
maybe switching scenes. Yeah, so that was a little unsettling, but that was by
Yeah.
far the scariest part of the movie. And yeah, I just didn't have a good time really, and it's hard for me not to have a great time at the movies. There's some
Yeah.
positive takeaways that I'll let you maybe jump into if you have any of them, but and I can definitely pull out some. But yeah, I don't think I really understand David Gordon Green using a similar visual style that the Halloween reboots was,
Yeah.
and kind of a similar small town feel. It felt all too rehashed, not from the original Exorcist, which if that would have been the play as well, I think I would have been mad. There were some nods, obviously, but it just seemed like he took the template from what he did kind of well with the Halloween sequels and put it into this franchise, and it just didn't work. And
Yeah.
I'm bummed to say that. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I going into the movie, I really didn't have a lot of expectations, just because the Halloween reboots, with David Gordon Green's Halloween reboots, are fine. I didn't. I thought the first one was probably the best of the three. They're not really to me like. I think he did a good job. I'll say that. I don't want to
Mhm.
throw him under the bus or anything like that. I think what he did with the Halloween reboot was better than really any type of sequel, Halloween sequel, we had gotten up to that point. So I
Mhm.
really enjoyed that. But honestly, they didn't leave a huge impression on me. And so going into this movie, I didn't really have any expectations either, as far as like, I, I'm also not like a huge like horror or exorcist fan, so like it wasn't like I was
Got
like
it.
dying for this movie to come out. But I will say that I'm kind of with you. It was very like lackluster in the sense that I don't know if I would use the term boring, because to me
Mhm.
it
Okay.
felt very like too fast paced. Like it was
Okay.
too
Yeah. Yeah.
quick, and it ended too quickly. And I'll probably talk a little bit more about that as we go in and just kind of give you a little
Yeah.
bit more examples. But to me, it felt really, really, you know, it didn't sit like they didn't give anything time to like build. I felt like, or like
None at all. Yeah.
there weren't really like that big of stakes. I guess. I mean, if your daughter gets possessed by a demon, I guess the stakes are pretty high if you're
Right.
Leslie Odom Jr. But like the stakes didn't feel that big to me. And
Mhm.
what I was thinking about when I saw the movie was like, if you remember the original Exorcist, it's kind of a slow burn. Like it's a slow burn.
Yeah.
It gradually revs up to like what the climax of the movie ends up being, and that makes it more unsettling.
Mhm.
um I don't think you can make that movie now and expect audiences to like be entertained by it, because most horror movies these days are like fast paced and like boom 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 boom. The original
Mhm.
Exorcist is not that. It's a pretty like boring movie, I guess would be a good term to put in there. But not boring in the sense that like you're uninterested. It's slow. It moves
Right.
slowly and it creates suspense better. And this movie is much more of a let's get to the point. Let's get these
Mhm.
girls possessed as quickly as possible and then come up with a plan as quickly as possible to get them unpossessed. And that plan also won't make that much sense, and we'll try to make it cool, like it's a throwback to the original, but it's like maybe we shouldn't have thrown back to the original that way. I don't know. So yes, but I get what you're saying. It's like, yeah, it's not executed well, and you
Right.
don't. I personally did not enjoy it as a
Mhm.
result. So yeah,
I think where like there's some good like David Gordon Green is clearly a good director, and it looks
yes,
good. He's got some flourishes throughout. He knows how to stage a horror scene, whether the scares are there or not. I don't think they are at all. But that's what's so frustrating. It's like, hey, David, like amp up the scares. We know what you can do as a director. Like just creep us out, man. And
yeah,
yeah, it falls into what a trap that a lot of movies are these days. And I don't want to step on any future big things here, but yeah, I couldn't believe how uninspired the scares were, and
yes,
despite some talented filmmaking that was
yeah.
thrown in there, yeah.
For sure. I think that yeah, I'm gonna second you, and I definitely don't want this to be a David Gordon Green
Mm-mm.
fest because I don't think he's the one that deserves the bashing. To me, it
No.
feels like it's one of this seems like the type of movie that I think him and the team that wrote it, like came up with the story, I think they probably had a different vision for what they wanted this movie to be.
Mm-hmm.
And basically someone else is coming in and saying like that's not going to work for the studio or whoever. So that's my theory. I don't know that for sure. That's just the feel of this movie to me. Um, so yeah, cool. Well, hey, that's one big thing out of the way. We only got two
Mm-hmm.
left to go. So I'll give mine. I'll hop in there. I'll give it a shot. My big thing on the Exorcist Believer is I feel like, and maybe we can have a discussion about this, but I feel like this movie forces a connection to the original Exorcist.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Meaning that yes, it is a sequel. It is in that same kind of demon possession exorcism universe, but it just really feels like, hey, this is a like. I guess the best way to put it is that the movie starts out kind of like, in my opinion, I felt like it started kind of strong in the sense that like it was setting something up, um, and it felt kind of unique, not necessarily like groundbreaking, but it
Mm-hmm.
felt different. And it felt like, okay, this is a story that, who knows where this is going to go, but I'm kind of invested early on. And that goes away pretty quickly. It, it- at least I felt that way. That feeling of like being invested and interested goes away really fast as soon as we realize that the girls are possessed by demons, because then it becomes like this. Okay, well, it felt like a heist movie, like where it's like, hey, let's get a team together and
Right.
then we're going to go do this exorcism. And so the first person they consult is Ellen Burstyn's character. And Ellen Burstyn, if you don't know or not familiar with the Exorcist franchise, Ellen Burstyn, hang on one second, played Chris McNeil in the original Exorcist, whose daughter Reagan was
Mm-hmm.
possessed by a demon. And so they bring her back, and I don't honestly, I can't remember. I don't think she was in any other sequels, um,
Um,
unless
yeah, I think you're right. And then not in the like second and third one, I know that.
right.
But
So she really wasn't brought back in any sequels, and then all of a
Mhm.
sudden in this movie, she's brought back as like a an exorcism expert. Like she's not like a religious person or a priest or a nun or whatever,
Mhm.
but she's brought back as like a, I don't know, some sort of like demonologist or something like that, which was not her role. Like that, she was just the mom.
Mhm.
Um, and so that seemed weird to me. I don't know how you felt about it, but it's like, okay, well, we got to make this connect to the original Exorcist somehow. Ellen Burstyn's still alive. Let's get her in the movie, and
Mhm.
this is the route they took. And then she doesn't like she. It feels like she's going to be a big presence in the movie, a big part of it, and then just not. Then they're just done
Right.
with her. It's like, hey, you're gonna get stabbed in the eyes, and then that. Thanks for showing up. Like
Mhm.
that's what it felt like to me. And so yeah, like that, when I say it feels like it forced that connection, it felt like it was going to be kind of its own thing, but then it felt like obligated to somehow, connect itself to the original Exorcist.
Mhm.
And then the train just goes off the tracks.
Mhm.
And it just becomes kind of a mess. We really don't like, obviously, we know their motivations. They want to get these girls unpossessed, but
Mhm.
like the execution of it seems like like it just, I couldn't figure out what they were doing. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. They're yeah. That I didn't really think of it as like a heist team up movie for a
mhm,
part because there was no convincing for anybody to join
right,
in besides the Catholic priest towards the end that
fair,
dies very unceremoniously.
yeah,
Again, spoiler alert for a lot of this. And yeah, I just don't understand why you bring her back and utilize her this way. And
yeah,
then also add in the estrangement from Reagan.
hmm, yeah,
And then again, spoilers, if you're just going to have her show up anyways.
yeah,
Yeah, like if you weren't able to get her and you had to write that in, that's one thing. But
Right.
they mend the relationship at the end, and I don't. I mean, I understand her mom's dying and she needs to be there, kind of, but or is
Yeah.
blind now. But yeah, I was really mesmerized about one when she first showed up. I was like, all right, it's a. I don't know how they're going to bring this home with her,
Hmm.
but at least it brings a little bit more clout to. For me, was a just kind of nothing movie at the time. I was like, all right, like, we got royalty in this movie, whether
Yeah.
it's believable or not. I don't really care. Like, oh man, she brought an extra oomph to
Yes.
certain scenes, and then
Sure.
you finally get to what is a potentially really scary scene, and she's defeated,
Yeah.
kind of
Just
right
real quick.
away. And yeah, so they do that with a few characters, and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, she's. I don't know why they brought her back if besides the loose connection, selling tickets, and all that
Right.
stuff. Which I don't know why I'm surprised, but I
So
am. So, yeah.
yeah, so I think there's another part of me where I think so from what I understood, and I don't think this is going to be the case moving forward. I could be wrong, is that they were going to treat this the way that they treated the Halloween sequels with David
Mm-hmm.
Gordon Green. It's like, hey, we're going to give you 3 movies out of this. Excuse me. To me, it feels like they saw it and they were like, hey, we're not going to do that. So let's just tie this up. Maybe it's going to be messy, but let's just go ahead and tie this up and don't leave any loose ends. So the way this movie ends is like, it doesn't feel like there's sequel material here because it's like, you know, they unpossess one girl, the other girl dies, unfortunately. Spoiler alert. And then Ellen Burstyn is reunited with Reagan. So Linda Blair does make an appearance again. Spoiler alert. Um, but and then it's just like, okay, movie's over. Like, let's leave it. Let's end on a high note, even though a girl died. Like, you know, and so it feels like they decided, hey, we're not going to make sequels to this movie. Let's just make it as clean as possible. Um, and yeah, like I think ultimately it suffers from that. I feel like if you, again, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, if there's no intervention, which that's my assumption, I don't know if it's true. If there's no intervention, David Gordon Green and his team are allowed to do what they want to do. I think this is a different movie. I think this is a different movie, maybe longer, more of a slow burn, leads into other movies, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not as much of a mess, essentially. So,
Right.
so
Yeah, and I mean, from what I understood, there was sequel already planned and like announced sequel for about 2 years from now.
mhm,
So I don't know if the bad reception is going to shake that up.
right,
Yeah, yeah, it does feel like they tried to wrap things up, but also was weirdly optimistic in the end, really quickly
mhm,
optimistic in the end, in its portrayal of faith and its portrayal for future sequels. Maybe like
right,
it almost felt like it needed to convince the audience to come back, as if they almost got cocky. Is kind of how I feel like it. It's like, oh,
yeah,
you guys are probably really scared. We need to calm you down a little bit with this weird monologue by the wonderful Ann Dowd, who's actually really good in the movie. I find her really effective in the movie. So,
yes,
but yeah, so I'm glad they gave her the moment to give the monologue at the end because
yeah,
she's the best actor you have in the movie, I think. So, besides,
agreed.
yeah. So, anyways,
I
all that being said, it just I'm confused of where it's going to go if it is going to go anywhere,
Yeah.
and yeah, just give
So
David Gordon Green let him loose. Like I don't think,
let him do his thing. Yeah.
yeah.
So as of right now, the sequel is still on schedule to be released in April of 2025. So about a year and 6 months from
Mhm.
now, year and a half from now is when it's scheduled to be released. The Exorcist Deceiver, as it is currently
Mhm.
titled. So we'll see. And then I just wanted to go back to your uh, mentioning of Ann Dowd in this film.
Mhm.
Absolutely fantastic. And I
Mhm.
feel like Ann Dowd is the perfect like um woman to play like somebody with like a religious background. I don't know if you've ever seen Handmaid's Tale.
Oh yeah,
Um
and she's in Hereditary,
yeah.
so
Yes.
and
Yeah, she's like fantastic.
she's got to be religious in real life. Because have you seen the movie Mass that came out?
No, I have not.
So it sounds like it's set in the Catholic Church, but it's about two families that were
Hmm.
involved in a mass shooting at a school, and the two families come together to try to mend any type of relationship. And she's in it, and she is unbelievable. So she has to be religious. It just feels like she's choosing it and choosing really interesting projects.
Right.
But anyways, she's fantastic. I
She
really
is
enjoy seeing her
really
and
great.
everything. Hmm.
She's very, very great. She's probably for me was the highlight of this movie. Her
Hmm.
performance. So, yeah, take that as you will. Okay, so we got through two big things. We only got one
Hmm.
left. I'm going to give it to you, Billy. So, what is your final big thing on The Exorcist Believer?
I wish they would have just chosen one religion to focus on how they do exorcists.
Mm-hmm.
A big uh, through line of this movie is a lot of different subsects of Christianity all thrown together,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of acknowledge that every religion has some type of technique to rid people of demon possession. And I found that interesting as a concept, but I think I would have just been more interested if they just went full into the evangelical church because it's in the South.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Went into what I guess think was Jehovah's Witness, for the other one. Like I couldn't quite tell
Yeah,
what the
it
guy
was
that broke into
confusing.
Leslie Odom Jr.'s house, because
Right.
then he
Yeah.
brought a woman that used old techniques from slave era time. It was just very,
Yeah.
very confusing, but kind of interesting, and they just didn't explore it enough. So I think you have to stay in the Catholic mold like The Exorcist did. I think that would have been fine to move on to a different religion or a different subsect of Christianity and just making it. This is not my coin thing. I heard on the big picture, but like a coexist bumper sticker,
Mm-hmm.
which is like kind of a weird choice. It's like we can all get this done, guys. It's like, yeah, like I don't need optimism in the Exorcist movie. Like show me the scares, show me the wrestle with faith, and then bring it home at the end with, yeah. Anyways, so it
Yeah.
just was confusing why they chose it to do it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And that's kind of what I was alluding to when I mentioned the heist movie aspect where it's like, hey,
Hmm.
let's do a big team up. Where essentially the team up is like different denominations of Christianity plus maybe some, old timey, witch doctor stuff slash,
Hmm.
maybe Jehovah's Witness. Let's just like throw it all in a pot and then just
Right.
like see what happens. Like that's what it felt like. And I agree with you 100%. Like if it was more focused on, and it didn't even have to be necessarily the Catholic Church, although the original movie, like it is the Catholic Church that does the exorcism. And that plays a big part of the story is how exorcisms go about through the church. And that's really interesting. And in this movie, it's okay, well, we got some demons. You're Catholic, you're evangelical, you're, whatever. Like
There's
you
an
are
atheist. Main guy is an atheist.
yeah,
So yeah.
you're an atheist.
Mhm.
You almost were a nun. Like something's gonna like we're just gonna throw everything at these demons and then something's gonna stick. Like that's what it felt like. And it's like, okay, well, cool, but it's like it doesn't it had this maybe this opportunity to kind of like tell a story of like, you know, because I think it alludes to this, and I think you had mentioned this as well. Like it kind of alludes to the fact of like, okay, well, there's something that connects everybody here. Um, but it didn't feel like that's what the point they were trying to get across. It felt like they started there and then it turned into like, kind of like I was saying, it was just like, let's just throw everything at this and then see what works. And then that'll be what we go with. Instead of like, hey, there's aspects of every faith that can, whatever. I don't know. I don't know how you reconcile that and how you make that
Mhm.
work, but that felt like the route of like, hey, like there are aspects of every faith, every religion that are similar and we're all united. And yeah, and then it just turns into not that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm with you. I kind of wish that they had a little bit more of a. I think would have served this movie better is if they had a more concise um, through line in regards to religion.
Mhm.
And this just it doesn't, unfortunately. So
Right. I think, yeah, adding in the aspect of like gathering a team, I feel like either the studio misunderstood, like horror can be slow and methodical because scares are coming and that's the entertainment.
mhm.
And this tried to bring in more. historical aspects to it based on how the beginning is portrayed. The different aspects of religion, a little
Hmm.
bit team up movie using the crutch of previous characters. It just was like, yeah, I just didn't understand all those elements coming in together when you kind of have a simple template already filled out for you. And then I don't know if you saw the quote by William Friedkin, I think when this movie got announced, and he was just like, I hope I'm long and gone when this movie was released. And
Right. Yeah.
R.I.P. William Friedkin, because you are
Yeah.
you. And I don't think he would have saw it. I don't think he would have wasted his time. And it has value. I'm not saying like it legitimizes William Friedkin's angry personality, which he's constantly angry. But yeah, it seems like John Carpenter either took a step back for his franchise and was somewhat supportive, maybe. But yeah, this just had no business being good from the jump. It seemed like, and I was
Hmm.
yeah, and I didn't expect that. This has a more consistent template for me of yeah, The Exorcist is just a great movie, so a sequel made sense, and that idea of grappling with faith is always a tantalizing theme in a movie, and just
Hmm.
yeah, it just didn't work unfortunately, and maybe we'll get a sequel and they'll figure out the way to make it better, but I don't know where they're going from here.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess that'll kind of bring us to the end of our three big things.
Mhm,
But yeah, thank you for joining me, Billy. I would say too, like with what you just kind of said, like maybe The Exorcist didn't ever need a sequel.
mhm,
Like maybe we just never needed to make one. Like if you go back and you watch The Exorcist, I guarantee. Well, not everybody's gonna like it.
mhm,
But to me, it's like quintessential horror cinema. Like
for
it
sure.
is to me, like it's up there with The Shining. Um, and there are a few movies that have come since then that I feel like are in my top five as far as horror movies go. Horror movie is very like it's a tough one to nail down because everyone has different kind of tastes when it comes
Mhm,
to horror movie because there are a lot of different types of horror movies. But the original Exorcist is like to me the horror movie.
mhm,
So maybe you don't need to make a sequel to that. And the way that that movie ended, like they made it. They made the sequels. They're like, hey, this
mhm,
this made us a ton of money. Let's just beat a dead horse here.
mhm,
So maybe this movie did not need to get made. So we'll wrap with this. Just your honest opinion, just a straightforward question, Billy.
mhm.
Would you recommend this movie?
I wouldn't.
No,
Not even in spooky season. Like if it
no,
had good scares, I could be like, yeah, spend $10 to $15 for St. Louis prices.
yeah,
Go to the theater and have a good time with your buddies. But I
yeah,
just don't. Yeah, I mean, maybe my tastes are all jacked up for horror movies these days, but I just yeah, it doesn't have any common denominator that I think that will allow people to latch on to. So.
agreed. Yeah, I'm with you.
Mhm.
I would not recommend this movie. I only recommended it to you so we can make this podcast.
Mhm.
And as soon as I
Hey,
got out of it, I was like, man, Billy's gonna have a great time.
I almost sent the GIF I sent to Drew to you, but it was just I don't know what I expected. The Arrested Development
Yeah,
Jason Bateman GIF that
yeah.
gets me every single time. But you mentioned Exorcist being your scariest movie of all time. That's what my podcast is going to be after this. It's
Oh,
our not of all time, but the ones that scared us the most. So that's just a
that's
fun
a good.
conversation to have. So
Yeah,
I'm excited you
I'm
brought that up because Exorcist is up there for me too.
yeah, I'm
It's
excited
absolutely
to listen
terrifying.
to that.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, Billy, I really appreciate you. That's going to bring us to the end of three big things, and it's fun to do this. It's been a while since we've done a three big things podcast, so
Mhm.
and it was good to have you back on.
Thanks, man.
Anything you want to plug before we go?
Yeah, so again, I'm Billy Rock of Do You Like Apples. We have a newsletter that comes out every Friday morning. We typically recommend two movies that are streaming based around a certain theme. And now we have a podcast. We're going on about 3 months of doing that. And with horror movies coming out this month, we have our movies that have scared us the most, us being me and my co host Drew. And then we got a lot of Martin Scorsese coming up later this month, and
Yes.
we are pumped about it. So it's going to be an amazing end of October talking about a lot of Scorsese and just the rest of the fall movie season, which is kind of I think for you as well and me and Drew is just our time to geek out as movie fans.
This
It's the best time
is
to talk about movies.
absolutely. This is by far my favorite time of year when it comes to movies. And basically up until January, February, like it just feels like, and even in January, February, it feels like I can go back and watch like all the ones that I haven't seen yet, like
Yes.
from just like the fall, early winter movie season. So fall holidays. So yeah, fun times ahead, and thank God. Hopefully, now we got the writer's strike over. Hopefully, we can end the acting strike or the SAG strike, and then we can have stuff to talk about. So, but yeah, I really appreciate you coming by, Billy. I'm sure I'll probably be reaching out about maybe doing another one of these in a few weeks
Hell
in
yeah.
regards to a particular movie, which I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
you know what that is, but we'll leave everybody else in suspense. So I'm Kenny of Corked Bats, Head Boy and Cineboys podcast. Of course, be sure to follow Corked Bats. Check out corkedbats.com. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Corked Bats. And of course, you can also check out the Cineboys on Twitter and Instagram at the Cineboys. And then, be on the lookout. There will be a spoiler-free review on corkbats.com for this movie. But if you've already listened this far, then that doesn't do you much. And also, we'll probably have some social media content on the Exorcist Believer coming soon. So be on the lookout for that. But that's it. Cool. Billy, appreciate you. Good to see you.
Peace. Yeah, good to see you too, man.